Welcome to Elizabeth's Chronicles. If you love true crime, consider subscribing. Thomas Gordon Kosberg, better known as Tom, was born on October 2 in 1948. He was the son of Osborne and Dorothy Kosberg. He had 5 siblings: Barry, age 15, Marianne, age 13, Gail, age 11, Vincent, age 2, and Osborne Jr., 6 months old. The family lived in their suburban home, at 143 East 22nd Avenue, in Vancouver, British Columbia. Friends and family stated the family were happy and very close. Tom had a history of mental illness. He had previously lived in a home for boys with mental issues. The home, Central City Mission, was ran by Robert Estegard. At the home, Tom got along well with the boys, but was known to keep running away from the facility. In January of 1964, 16-year-old Tom Kosberg was admitted to the Crease Clinic, a mental institution. He was released in May of the same year. He attended group therapy after. Dr. Bryson from the clinic said that Tom had emotional issues, and a personality disorder that was found in many teenagers his age. He also said that his condition would not lead to any manifestation of violence at some future date. On December 9, in 1965, Tom purchased a bottle of sleeping pills. While his family and his mother's friend, Florence, were watching a television show, he prepared them all chocolate milkshakes, laced with sleeping pills. The family friend dozed off with the family, but at 11 p.m. she woke. Tom suggested she stay the night, but she refused and left for home. Tom's father arrived home around 1 a.m., after his shift as a truck driver at Allied Heat and Fuel Company. Everyone was asleep, so he also drank one of the already prepared milkshakes and went to bed. At around 4 a.m. Tom went into the basement, and grabbed a double-sided axe, and started with his siblings, hacking each one to death. He then did the same to his mother and father. All of his brothers and sisters died in bed, by severe skull and brain injuries, except for Marianne, who was still alive in her bed, but had severe head injuries. She underwent emergency surgery, but died several days later. The pathologist said none of the family died instantly, and probably suffered for some time before dying. The sole survivor was 6-month-old Osborne Jr. He was found unharmed. However, authorities suspect Tom probably attempted to smother him, but didn't realize it was unsuccessful. Tom then changed his clothes, and drove his father's car. He accidentally drove it into a power pole. He then stole another car, where he then found a pay phone, and called Robert Estegard, a friend, who drove him to Dr. Wong. He was described as being noticeably trembling, having cramps, and holding his stomach. He was drifting in and out of sleep. He told Dr. Wong he had done something awful. The police were notified. Mr. and Mrs. Kosberg were found in their bedroom, in bed. The 2-year-old son, Vincent, was found on the floor beside the bed. Gail and Marianne were in a front bedroom. Barry was in the rear bedroom. Tom Kosberg was arrested and charged with 5 counts of juvenile delinquency, in connection to capital murder. Superintendent James Mundy was the investigating officer. He described the crime scene as the worst he had ever seen in his long career. On December 14, he was found to be mentally ill, and sent to Riverview Mental Hospital, until it was determined he was mentally fit to stand trial. His trial was held in 1967, and only lasted a few hours. He pled not guilty, and his statement was read to the court, admitting how he murdered his family with an axe, after drugging them with milkshakes. Dr. Joseph Thomas, and another psychiatrist testified that the acts were hideous, but that he suffered from mental illness when he murdered his family, which kept him from understanding the ramifications of his actions. It was testified that he was capable of carrying out complex actions, but that he was not able to determine right from wrong, and that he was suffering from schizophrenia. Dr. Thomas told the court that Thomas Kosberg's mental illness had been building up in the youth, and that it reached an uncontrollable state on the night of the murders. The coroner, Glenn MacDonald, ruled that all the deaths were unnatural, and were due to numerous axe wounds to the head of each victim. A week prior to the murders, Thomas Kosberg contacted Dr. Wong's office in an attempt at seeing the doctor, but Dr. Wong's message establishing an appointment to see him back to Thomas did not reach him. On February 16 of 1967, the Vancouver Supreme Court declared Thomas Gordon Kosberg not guilty by reason of insanity, and ordered him to be held at Riverview Mental Hospital, until further notice from the courts. In September of 1977, Tom Kosberg was found to no longer be a danger to society, and ordered to be released on the provision that he had to live in approved housing in British Columbia, and check in once a week to an appointed official. It was documented that he had furthered his education. They noted that they have no doubts he will be a model citizen, and they feel once released it will be the last they hear of him. It was noted as a conditional discharge, recommended by the government's order in council, and the Patient Review Board, which stated that his release is in the best interest, and not contrary to the interest of the public. Dr. John Duffy criticized the media for their headlines when Tom Kosberg was released, calling him an axe murderer. Dr. Duffy said the past is behind Kosberg, and you don't call someone who runs over someone a Chevrolet killer or Pontiac killer, so why would you label a young man who murdered his family an axe killer? He said it's really upsetting to all those who work with these people. Tom Kosberg was not allowed to own any guns, and could be sent back to the hospital if the courts deemed it necessary. Tom Kosberg later married, and worked for Vancouver Children's Hospital for over 30 years. Tom passed away on January 1 of 2016. Leonard Raymond Hogue, age 34, was born on April 7, 1931 in St. Boniface, near Winnipeg, in Manitoba. His family was working class during the World War II era. By 1951 he married the love of his life, Vera Irene Howes. He became a Canadian police officer. The couple had 6 children: Larry, age 13, Noreen, age 12, Raymond, age 8, Clifford, age 6, Darlene, age 4, and Richard, age 3. The family lived at 1793 Harbour Drive, in Coquitlam, British Columbia. Hogue was a loving father who spent all of his free time with his family. With 6 children to feed, Hogue would form a friendship with 2 other cops, David Harrison and John McCluskey. All 3 would become crooked cops, doing heists around Vancouver in the 1960s. One late night, while on patrol with Joe Percival, brother-in-law to his friend McCluskey, the 2 discovered a Dairy Queen unlocked. The 2 police officers entered the restaurant, and while just checking it out, they discovered the night deposit in the freezer. The officers took the deposit. In the 1960s, Dairy Queen officials felt it was safer to hide the deposit in the freezer, instead of having teenagers drop it off at the bank in the late hours of the night. Hogue and Percival didn't know about Dairy Queen's procedure until seeing the robbery report later that week. This gave the crooked officers an opportunity. They reached out to a fellow officer, Harrison, and they came up with a piece of metal that would jimmy the door locks at Dairy Queen stores. The officers became known as the Ice Cream Bandits. They stole deposits from different Dairy Queen stores around the area. Due to the frequent robberies of this nature, Dairy Queen quickly changed its policy, and started allowing night deposits. In addition to the Dairy Queen robberies, were several homes. All were wealthy families on vacation when the robberies occurred. The families notified the police prior to taking their vacations, so they could keep an eye on their property. During this time, suspicions aroused and several officers were implicated in the robberies, but evidence was scarce, so they were never charged. Approximately a year later, the group of crooked police officers decided the smaller thefts were not netting enough profit, so they raised the bar. On Christmas Eve in 1962, Hogue and Percival put on long trench coats, ski masks, and carried rifles into the local bank. Their timing played into their favor as the tellers were all counting money when they entered. The men were in and out in less than 2 minutes. The duo was using a stolen car that they had put a two-way police radio in. In the robberies they would send other officers to the wrong location, giving them time to get away. In their first robbery they got away with over $106,000, in today's standards $600,000. Hogue moved his family to Vancouver, and purchased a large house in the richer neighborhood of Coquitlam. He was known to flaunt his money in front of friends and family. He lavished his wife and children with gifts. It was well known that cops who were suspected of wrongdoings were transferred to work at the city jail. Hogue found himself working at the city jail. Harrison and Percival also were transferred to city jail duty, but they both quit the Vancouver Police Department. Harrison moved to Nelson and started working as a police officer there. And Percival went into real estate, which helped hide his large amounts of cash. Hogue continued working at City Hall. Within a few weeks, the trio decided to do another robbery. On June 22, in 1964, they robbed a Sears department store. As the robbers were leaving, a credit manager tripped Hogue, causing him to drop and leave his Loomis bag, which contained $88,000. On January 15, in 1965, they robbed another bank. The Bank of Nova Scotia in Dunbar. On this robbery, McCluskey assisted as the getaway driver. However, he panicked when some people walked by his car, and honked his horn. This ended the robbery early, and only netting $13,000. By this time, rumors were spreading that police officers were robbing banks. The men were well aware of the rumors, and decided they'd pull off one last heist. This time a train. The men had knowledge that large shipments of cash was coming from Canadian Pacific Railway's yard, on West Pender. The shipment was bills going back to Ottawa for destruction, for out-of-circulation bills. On February 11, 1965, the group, dressed in disguises. Hogue disguised himself as a Canadian Pacific Railway police officer, Harrison as a mail carrier, Percival as a Canadian Pacific Railway detective, and McCluskey as the train engineer. The group stole $1.2 million, which in today's standards would equate to $6 billion. The only hitch to their perfect getaway was the money had been stamped with 3 half-inch holes prior to delivery, to keep it from re-entering circulation. However, the group painstakingly patched the money by cutting pieces of other bills. It took several weeks, but the men began circulating the stolen money. Percival was caught on April 17, 1965, at a bar in Edmonton. He kept paying for his beer with patched $20 bills. The bartender became suspicious and called authorities. He was arrested. The next day, Hogue, while working at the city jail, got the news that Percival was arrested. He called McCluskey on the work phone. Hogue was called into Inspector McGregor's office. Hogue was noticeably shaken, and didn't realize that he gave the list of men away to his superiors. That evening at Easter dinner at his in-laws, the family said he was nervous, and kept answering long calls while at dinner. He lost all interest in conversation, and would just stare blankly for long periods of time. The next morning, Hogue was involved in a traffic accident in the family's Volkswagen. He had a deep cut above his right eye, which required several stitches at Royal Columbia Hospital. He called in sick that day, referencing the accident. Hogue claimed he was run off the road by another car, but it's believed he may have tried to kill himself since no other vehicles were involved, and no witnesses came forward. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police visited Hogue's home later in the evening about the car crash. A few hours later, Hogue rented a station wagon from a rental shop in Vancouver at 5:30 p.m., then visited a friend, and borrowed a .357 Magnum gun. At around 1 a.m. Hogue would abandon his rental car about a half a mile from his family's home. In the pouring rain, he walked home. At around 1:30 a.m. he entered the home. He walked upstairs and into the bedroom he shared with his wife, Vera, and while sleeping, he shot her in the head. He then made his way to his older boys' room, Larry and Raymond. The boys were already awake, and sitting up in the bed after hearing the first shot that killed their mother, but didn't realize what was happening until their father opened the door. When the boys noticed a gun in their father's hand, they panicked, and attempted to get away. Larry, being on the top bunk, could not get off fast enough, and was shot twice in the head. Raymond was able to get out of the door, and scrambled to hide. Hogue found Clifford hiding in the utility closet next to the bathroom. He shot him in the head. Raymond was hiding in the locked bathroom. His father busted the door down. The two struggled, but his father was much bigger. The first shot struck the toilet, but the second hit Raymond in the head, killing him. Hogue found his daughter's bedroom empty. The older daughter, Noreen, had taken the younger, Darlene, into the basement and the two were hiding. Hogue located them and shot them both in the head. Richard, the youngest, was the last to die. He was whimpering in his bed when his father shot him in the head. Hogue retreated back to his bedroom, and shot himself in the head. The following day, when Hogue failed to show up for work, Vancouver police sent someone to check up on Hogue, but returned reporting nothing was suspicious. The next day, when Hogue still failed to show up for work, Jail Staff Sergeant Bert Much and another inspector went to the Hogue's home. When nobody answered, they looked through the windows, and noticed little Darlene's lifeless body through the basement window. The two contacted Royal Canadian Mounted Police, since the area was not in their jurisdiction. The only living survivor inside the home was a pet hamster running on its hamster wheel. A few weeks later, it was concluded that Leonard Hogue had murdered his family, and committed suicide to avoid a possible implication in the crimes. Tom Kosberg had a history of mental illness. Unfortunately, his mental illness escalated out of control, resulting in him murdering his family. After getting the help needed, he went on to live a normal life. Sadly, his family didn't get to do the same. Leonard Hogue was a crooked cop who spent the majority of his life pulling off robberies. When his superiors were closing in on him, he cowardly murdered his entire family, including himself. He was a greedy and selfish man who murdered innocent people. That concludes this episode. Keep your eye out for the next episode, coming soon. If you enjoy true crime stories like these, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.